Hello, and a very warm welcome to another live stream from the team here at Mobilise. My name's James Townsend, I'm CEO of Mobilise, and we are an organisation that is working with local authorities and carer supporting organisations around the country to help carers to boost capacity for the 13.6 million unpaid carers in the UK who've had a pretty rough time over the last 12 months, and we're looking to help them with online support. Now, just looking at my screen, I think I might be continuing to have connection problems. So I'm particularly delighted that today, in our series of Build Back Better for Carers, we have somebody who doesn't even need to be interviewed, can just wax lyrical about all of the themes that we're talking about. So my apologies if I drop out at any moment. I'm hoping that won't interrupt your experience of the conversation that we're having today. Janine Woodward-Grant is Deputy CEO of the Carer Centre for Bath and North East Somerset. Very particular to her role is acting as digital lead for the Carer Centre. So Janine has been posting some fantastic blogs on LinkedIn and Medium about the experience of their organisation over the past year. And I'm delighted that she's going to be able to join us today. Before we get started, though, can I just say a quick welcome to everybody who's following online live and also after this conversation. We'd love to hear your questions, comments, your experiences, all of that as we go through. And I'll try and put some of those questions to Janine as we go. Now let's say hello to Janine. Janine, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a great privilege to have you with us. And whereabouts in the country are you this evening, Janine?
I'm in a little town called Midsummer Norton, which is just south of Bath.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you streaming in from there. And we're going to have a conversation today about some of your experiences of the last 12 months and how we can build back better for carers, because there's been all sorts of challenges in the last 12 months, and actually we've learned a huge amount, and hopefully we can put that to a good cause in the future. But my first question really, Janine, is what has the last 12 months been like for you?
Somewhat of a roller coaster, as I think everyone would say. Certainly easier than it would have been for some people. I don't have caring responsibilities, which I know has been a real challenge for all of the carers that we're supporting. But yeah, you know, looking after a 3-year-old whilst working and without nursery had its challenges, fitting in work kind of in every hour that you could. You know, managing kind of without friends and without seeing family, all of those kind of feelings of loneliness and isolation and the uncertainty. And also the feeling, which I think many in the carer support organisations feel like, are we doing enough for all of those people who really need our support? Are we changing quickly enough? Are we meeting their needs in this new environment? Is there anything more that we can do? It's been challenging, but also had periods of light as well, where we felt like we found a real solution to help take that forward. So yeah. What more can you say?
Interestingly, so your organisation, the Bath and North East Somerset Carer Centre, kind of came into COVID already on the front foot in terms of thinking about digital engagement and how online support can really be used to help parents. But I wonder if you can just talk us through some of the lessons that you've picked up in the last 12 months for what is at engaging carers online.
Yeah, absolutely. So so we didn't have many services online at the start of COVID, but we sort of understood the design process that we wanted to take for designing new services. So it was kind of really that sounds really bad, fortuitous that COVID came along, fortuitous that we'd done that work before COVID had come along. So we were prepared to be able to kind of move quite quickly. And through that whole process, what we really learned was that you have to talk to carers, you have to talk to the users, you have to find out what their needs are and what their behaviours are and how you can match what you want to offer with what their needs and behaviours are, and kind of like put those two things together. So it's, for us, it wasn't that we went, we had a cafe face to face offline So we must have a cafe online when we move. We had a break that was face-to-face, so we must replicate that online. Well, that's not going to work if your users aren't used to going online in that way. It's also a very different kind of environment online to being offline. So you have to think about how you might facilitate that, or kind of how that's going to work. So we very much use the first kind of very quick period to talk to carers to understand what they would want online, what we might be able to still do offline. And then we also kind of invested in a period of piloting, which the chief executive was, I guess, a little frustrated at, because he was like, deliver now. We were like, no, let's test it. Let's make sure it's right before we launch it out to everybody. So doing that kind of really talking to carers and understanding what they might want and how we could offer that, designing something, kind of testing it to make sure it really worked, and then tweaking it and then launching it, really helped to make sure that the services that we offered online and offline throughout COVID kind of met the needs of the people that we were trying to serve.
Real challenge there, Janine. Sorry, I might have glitched out for a second. There's a real challenge in what you're describing, because in the middle of a pandemic, particularly when we can really see how much pressure carers are coming under, there's a real pressure to move really quickly and to just get something out of the door, even if it's flawed. And so you've obviously been grappling with that tension. Can you just describe a bit more about how you've approached managing those different pressures on you?
I guess we've done quite a lot of training and kind of had quite a lot of support before COVID to understand the importance of kind of trialing and testing, because it feels like it's taking longer, but it's saving you time. Because if you take 2 weeks to trial and test something and it fails, then you haven't launched that out, spent a lot of money on kind of like trying to work out how you can deliver that to lots of people, only for it not to work. And then you get to that stage, and like, we've been there as an organization, don't get me wrong. You get to the stage where you're like, but we've launched it now, we have to make the flipping thing work. And so you like try every which way you can to kind of try and jimmy it into kind of people's needs and behaviors, sort of thing. Whereas if you kind of do that test, you're like, oh, that bit didn't work, we'll ditch that then. We'll just kind of focus on kind of what this delivers over here, and kind of you can save yourself time in delivering something which is really meaningful by taking a small amount of time to kind of do that testing process. But there is a real tension, and I guess we were lucky in a sense that alongside all of the new services we were offering, we decided to launch a different new service, but that was a proactive calling service out to carers. So it kind of gave us a sense of, well, we can take a little bit longer over in this service because we know that carers are being called over here, like as many carers as we could, we were ringing. And we also had a support line that people could kind of call into if they were, really feeling kind of uncertainty or challenge or had questions. So there was other stuff going on to support carers, which I guess helped to give us a bit of breathing space to make sure that we got what was happening over here right.
I suppose another consideration, certainly that we've used Mobilise. Sorry, I'm stepping out of interviewer role here and sharing our own experience. But one of the things that we've learned is that you can pilot stuff with people who are up for trying something new. So just because you haven't fully launched it yet doesn't mean that you're not helping anybody. Actually, you're engaging with people who are ready for there to be glitches and particularly in a time of a pandemic. That's really important. Marie-Andre writes in and asks about transferring physical services to just kind of moving them across to being online. And I wondered, Janine, if you can say a little bit about the standard format for a offline event would be to have a, like you say, a cafe or something like that, where people can come and engage with each other. So what is different?
So I guess we used a really interesting tool that we learned through some work we've done with an organisation called the DOT Project. It's called a consequence scan, where you look at what are the intended and unintended consequences of the service or the product that you've got. And when we did that, what we realized is when we were doing things sort of face-to-face and offline, you can rely a lot more on body language. You can rely a lot more on people kind of sensing where they can have conversations, what table they might sit at. You can have lots of things going on in the same room, but kind of online, I mean, obviously you can have different kind of Zoom breakout rooms, but in general, if you're at an online cafe, you're all in that same space. And you can't just launch 8 people into a space and then expect a conversation to happen. You have to think about how you're going to facilitate that. And until we'd kind of sat down and done this consequence scan and realized we really want to make people connect, and an unintended consequence could be loud people will take over and quieter people will feel even less connected because they've been in a room and they haven't been able to talk at all. We were like, wow, we're actually going to have to facilitate this way more than we try to do when we allow carers that kind of like space and freedom when they're in a room, kind of, you know, making it up for themselves essentially. So we had to put a lot more effort into that facilitation. We kind of wrote guides for the facilitators. You know, we kind of had a little working group of them so they could kind of come together and share experiences. And yeah, that was a really interesting difference that I think if we hadn't thought really carefully about what the experience that carer was going to go through when they were kind of in that cafe space, we might have got it wrong.
Yeah, and facilitation is such a key part of that, because as Jackie says, when you're in a room together, you can read body language, and so much of that interaction is something that we've become used to just by existing with other humans. So we've got to relearn a new way of communicating with each other and a new dynamic to the room. And as you say, I think facilitation is a really important part of that. A bit of in the room here, Janine, about accessibility as well, because you mentioned that some people will naturally become a kind of a dominant character in a group in an offline space. Can you just talk to me a little bit about how the move to the things that you've been thinking about in terms of inclusion as you move some of your services to online, or perhaps as you would describe them, create new services that are also online?
Yeah, so a really good example of that would actually be what people might not think of as a digital service, but we've actually developed some telephone cafes where people who can't kind of get online, you know, most people have a landline, if not a mobile phone. So once we developed our online cafes, we thought, okay, well, how are we going to make sure that we can kind of include kind of these other people? And actually, telephone is even more difficult than kind of online, because you can't see anything. So there's no sense of body language that you can kind of get at all. So we have to think really carefully about facilitation. And we used a brilliant organization called I Am, We Are, who are online kind of hosts and facilitators. And they came into a new space with us quite willingly, looking at kind of how do you do it kind of on the telephone. And to make sure those spaces were sort of accessible and inclusive, we've used a kind of technique called the circle, where sort of everyone knows, on a piece of paper, you write down where people are sitting in the circle. So, and you'll tend to only have fewer people on the phone, so maybe 4 or 5. But what that means is whenever a question is asked, you'll kind of give your answer, and then you'll say, oh, now I'll pass on to X, who you know is the next person sitting in the circle with you. So everyone is included, everyone gets a chance to answer. Of course, you can say, do you know, I don't want to answer this question, actually, I'm gonna pass on, and it can kind of move around, but then it's your choice whether you want to engage or not. And that, all of the carers who participated in those telephone cafes have absolutely loved that. They've said they've often felt unable to be included in groups which have been face to face because they haven't known people, they've been too shy, it's scared them off, they haven't gone back, and being in that space and feeling so included has really meant that they've wanted to come back again and again. You know, one of them has gone on to become a facilitator of a phone cafe because they've loved it so much. So yeah, I think you do have to think about it, but I think what it's taught us is that we actually have to think about it more when we're going back to face. It's taught us a lot about the lessons that we want to take back to make sure we are being fully inclusive when we go back to doing some of our activities face to face with carers.
It's really interesting that Janine, and Suzanne mentions how online conversations have a very different dynamic, which is really exciting to a lot of people. I think for the reasons that you described, that it's in many ways a more equitable place. And Janine, have you seen the same people who you were engaging previously engaging with your services? Have you seen a different group? Have you seen more, fewer? What kind of changes have you seen in the nature of the group that you're serving?
So across the board, both in new offline services that we offer and in online services which we've developed, we've definitely, bizarrely through COVID, supported more carers through what we're doing, because we've been able to meet a wider variety of needs that we hadn't been able to meet before, which is a silver lining to come out of what's been a pretty terrible year for a lot of carers. So yeah.
Absolutely. And you mentioned facilitation and building new services. That is not something that we can just make up as we go along, right? It sounds like you've been very deliberate about that. Can you say, have you found it important to have particular skill sets within the team as you're doing that? Because I think many people watching along will quite rightly say, well, gosh, this is completely out of my comfort zone. I don't know where to start. So what are the skill sets that you've identified as being helpful?
So interestingly, we haven't employed new people to do this, and we hadn't brought on new people with specific sort of digital or design kind of skills sort of before the pandemic. So the team that are delivering this are the exact same team that were delivering everything before the pandemic. But what we did was we invested in training and mentoring to help us as an organisation understand what does deliberate service design, what does user-centred service design look like, and how can we deliver that? So we worked really closely with an organisation called the DOT Project, who've just done some brilliant work with us around kind of user-centred design, and we invested in our staff, kind of giving them the time and the space to make sure that they could sort of understand these new kind of skills and approaches, and really champion them through the organisation. I guess the skills that those staff really needed were an appetite for change, sort of a recognition that working in this new way was something that they wanted to do. I think they needed bravery, because it's tough to step out into something new. Like, I think every day I was just, worried that it was the wrong call, that we were doing the wrong thing, like, were we moving in the right direction? So I think you need bravery. And I think you need a senior management team, a trustee board, or kind of like people around you in the organisation that recognise it's okay if it goes wrong. Because it's not a mistake, it's just the way you learn. So if a cafe fails, that's not failure. You just know how to do it differently next time. You've learned what your users like or what they don't like. That's not failure, that's learning. But I think it's a bit of a shift of mindset, because I think before we'd always thought, service isn't working, this is terrible, how can we fix it? What have we done wrong? And so, well, service isn't working. Well, clearly the users don't, it doesn't work for users. So let's find out what they do need, what does work for them. And so it's more kind of like aptitudes rather than skills that I think you need. And I think anyone can pick up the skills, but it's about kind of helping people to develop those aptitudes, to feel confident enough to kind of step out and pick up those skills. And I definitely think it's about finding peers who are doing the same thing and finding experts who you can pull in, who can kind of, give you the direction of travel to take.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you're describing some partners there who've got that kind of expertise in a particular approach that you can then work with to build up the capacity of the team, which is really exciting. And now I'm going to ask you about your vision for what you want to be doing in the future in a moment. But Jackie's asked a really important question, which is around the age group of those accessing the services. And have you seen a flip at all, Janine, as you've developed new services, that you've had new age groups joining?
I haven't looked at the data on that, I'll be honest. It will be interesting for me to go back and see. But in terms of the age group, we support young and adult carers. So and we've the services that we've developed for both young and adult carers. So we've developed online breaks for kind of both ages. Our telephone cafes and our online cafes are more for older carers. We tried them with younger carers, it didn't work. So we stopped doing them. Our kind of support calls out, again, we've been doing those both to young carers or their parents and to adult carers. So we try and make sure there's parity, because we are kind of an all-age carers centre. But obviously sometimes the exact service is slightly different, because we want to make sure we're meeting the needs of adults and children, which are a bit different.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Now, I've taken you on a tour around all sorts of interesting questions there, Janine. But the purpose of inviting you on was to allow you to share your vision for what we can do to build back better for carers. So what would be the couple of steps that you would like to see change and improve as we look to the long term and look to learn the lessons from the last 12 months?
I think there are two key things, really. The first is around sort of carer centre, certainly what I would like to see our carer centre do. And the second is around some of the learnings that we found around community. So I think for us as a carer centre, we are, because we've got an operational plan, but we're really committed to making sure that whilst we definitely want to go back to face-to-face activities, we know the benefits that those will bring our carers. There are benefits to online and kind of telephony activities that we've been delivering that we don't want to lose. There are numerous carers who are able to access those kind of virtual services that cannot access our physical services. And so if we just go, well, thank goodness that's over, we don't have to worry about online again, we know everyone just wants face-to-face.
Put the webcam back in the cupboard.
Yeah. All of those carers will be excluded again. And that would be terrible, because they are new carers who have been able to access what we can offer. And they've said how important it is to them. And that would be the worst possible outcome, that we lose all of that they've gained over this period. So I think to build back better, we really need to think, what did we learn? What was good about those different services that we offered? And what does a blended offer look like? We can't do the same amount of face-to-face and the same amount of online. Of course we can't, because we're only human. There's only so much resource that we can give. So how could it work, and what does it look like? And I'm sure that there will be, we're going to try to do this in a user-centered way again. So we'll be talking to carers, we'll be trialing and prototyping. I'm sure we'll do it wrong. I'm sure we'll do it wrong. But I'm sure that through doing it wrong, that will help us understand if it works, or if it doesn't, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe we'll have to think differently, but we're really committed to looking at how we learn those lessons and kind of retain that online offer, as well as kind of doing face-to-face. And I think that the other is around what we've kind of really heard from carers around community. And there've been some brilliant examples of community stepping up to support carers through the whole of COVID. So, that's been fantastic to see and fantastic to hear in terms of the support that is given to carers. But we've also really been talking to carers about kind of their experiences and where it hasn't gone so well. And there've been some really key insights coming out from carers where they haven't been heard by their community. And we've also realised that community is a really bad word, because it means a different thing to different people. So I'm going to stop using it now and say sort of the people who are around carers who could support them. So that might be their friends and family, or it might be kind of professional support like GPs or kind of social workers or other charities or churches or shopkeepers, like anyone who could be around you. And what we've really heard from carers, particularly through COVID, is people don't see them. They don't see carers. So they don't ask them how they are. Or maybe they're just embarrassed to ask them how they are, I don't know. But that's really challenging when you don't feel seen. And often on top of that, they don't feel heard. So they feel like they're saying things, but that's not actually what they're trying to say is not being heard, particularly kind of in a professional context. And I'm absolutely not dissing all professionals, because I think they do a fantastic job, and there are also brilliant examples of when they help carers, but we're also hearing that sometimes carers are not heard. And I think that they're also, carers often just really need to offload, and they really need to talk. And what we heard time and time again from carers is when they were talking on the phone to us, it is so good just to talk to someone who is not judging me, who is just listening, who is giving me empathy. And I know there's nothing you can do to help me, but the fact that you've just sat there and listened has meant the world to me. And they were also saying that about how like brilliant. So one carer I had a fantastic conversation with her, and she just said it was brilliant to have her brother there, who she could just ring up and go, this happened today, blah, 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 blah. And her brother would be like, oh yeah, that's a bit rubbish, isn't it? And she'd be like, yeah, I know, thanks, bye. And that for her, like, that doesn't solve a carer's problems. You know, that doesn't take away all of their challenges at all. But where we heard carers really able to cope was when they had that outlet. And when we heard carers really struggling was when they didn't have that outlet, when they really felt alone. They felt no one wanted to listen to them, no one heard them, people were judging them. And so they just closed down. They won't tell people how they're feeling because they don't want that judgment, and they don't feel heard anyway. So if you ask them if they're okay, they'll say yes, when they're not at all, because caring is really tough. So, you know, I think hearing all this about how there are small behavioural changes that as a community as a whole we could make, that we think, we might be wrong, but we think could really, really help carers manage that challenging role that they have. And so part of my vision for building back better for carers is, how can we achieve that behavioural change? How can we create a society which recognises carers and understands what it is like when you're looking after someone you love, when you're a friend and family member of someone who is ill, and how you might need to be a little bit more proactive than you thought you might have to in order to give that person help. You know, don't ask them if they want help. Bake them a cake and take it round and leave it on the doorstep. Knock on the door and tell them that you're going to the shop and ask them what am I going to get you? Like, I'm getting you something. So what am I getting you? You know, because it's those small changes. I'm trying to paraphrase a very long period of research that we did, so this may make absolutely no sense to anyone, but we really heard that, yeah, carers just aren't understood. And I feel like if we could make a small difference to our behaviour as a community, professional and kind of friends and family, we could make a difference.
I think what you're describing there, Janine, will chime with a lot of people who are involved in supporting carers in all sorts of ways. And what you're saying, which I think is really important, is that it's not that carers are invisible, it's that they're not being seen. And it's not that carers aren't speaking, it's that they're not being heard. And those are very different things. And that means that we need a different change. And you also, I think, chime in with a lot of Dr. Warrington Ellen's, I just promoted him very briefly, Dr. Warrington Ellen's research at Liverpool University about the importance of community, and he describes it as networks. The people that you can engage with very often. I mean, we see it in the one-to-one coaching calls that we provide through Mobilise. Just 30 minutes. Actually, the biggest thing that we're doing is listening in a really structured way. And that can shift people a really long way. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left, Janine. And the other question that I want to put to you really is how you think digital service design can rethink, not necessarily just in terms of response to COVID, but how can digital service design rethink the way we conceptualize approaching carer support more generally?
All right, so have you got 8 hours? No, I'll try and make it quick. So I think for us, digital service design is not, I think you could get rid of the word digital, because I think it's just about service design. And I think for us, it's about an approach that you can take to delivering services, some of which may be online and some of which may be offline. And it's about putting users right at the center of what you're designing. And we had thought, and I've written a blog post about this, we had thought that we were putting users at the center of what we were doing when we were designing things. But we weren't. We were designing things and then taking them to users or to carers and going, does this look like it's going to work? And carers going, maybe. And us going, brilliant. Or us applying for funding and going, we've got 3 years of funding to do this brilliant thing. And carers going, okay? And I think that we've learned different ways that we can put users at the center all the way through the process, right from conception, or, from coming up with a concept, all the way through to delivering and then kind of ongoing evaluation in ways that we hadn't thought of before. And that we feel that's really made the services that we're offering stronger. So for us, digital service design is about the way that we design any services, online or offline. And it's just about constantly going back to what are the needs of the people that we're trying to serve? Is this meeting their needs? If not, why not? How can we change it? Is it something about their behaviors that we're not matching it? Is it something, is it something else? But it's just constantly coming back to that question. Is this meeting the needs of carers? Not me, and how many assumptions am I putting into this about, well, I'd like it. If I was a carer, this is what I'd want to do, which is like definitely what we've done before, because we're guilty of like all of these like things I'm talking about. We've definitely done, taking away all of our assumptions, really gathering insights from carers, like really trying to understand how we can help them. And someone's needs, like carers' needs don't stay the same. So it's no good us having done research through COVID and going, right, well, that's what we're going to base all of our services on for the next 5 years. People's needs change almost daily. So it's
Janine,
an ongoing process.
You make it sound so simple, and you've condensed the complexities that I know at Mobilise we've been working through for a good little while. You've condensed that into a really simple essence, which is to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the users that we're looking to serve. Janine, it's been a real treat to spend some time with you and hear about your experiences. And I know that many other people with a similar mission to support carers in their area will have really identified with a lot of what you've described. So thank you. Thank you to everybody who's been making comments while we've been live. And please do keep those comments and questions coming in if you're watching on catch up as we go along. We're here every Thursday afternoon at 6 p.m. Talking about how we can build back better for carers and reimagine the service and support design that we offer them. So thank you for joining us today, Janine, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much for having me.